citizens gathering to voice our preference for clean food on Kauai and to change the agricultural system away from these dangerous GMO crops that Kauai is a world leader of, and to become a world leader of small family farms that produce real food that people can eat. Well, GMO stands for genetically modified organism, and that means the genes or the DNA spiral, that's the classic DNA spiral, that a section of that DNA is taken from one organism and forcefully, violently inserted into another organism, past its natural barriers from foreign DNA. Foreign DNA doesn't normally mix, but violently inserted into the new organism, and that new plant then has new properties. Such the classic example is taking DNA from a fish and sticking it into something like a strawberry, where the fish might have resisted cold water. They want the strawberry to resist cold weather. The problem is that they don't fully understand what they're doing or how genes and DNA operate, so it's a bit of random hacking. I like to call it genetic hacking, and it is very dangerous with a lot of unknown side effects. Kauai is unique, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is we have a great climate here. You can grow 3 corn crops a year here, and we also have a very lax legislature that's hungry for jobs, and I think is willing to kind of, not really ask too many questions in order to get those jobs. And 3, I think we have a large number of agriculture workers that used to work in the sugarcane or pineapple fields. Those fields were going out. They needed new jobs for those workers, so I think they thought that biotech was the match for them. I think there's multiple reasons. One is a complicated issue. You're talking about DNA sequences and gene modification. It's not something that is the easiest thing to grasp. The other reason that people don't know that much about it is because the news doesn't really talk about it. It's not covered, it's not talked about, and so it relies on alternative media and people talking to their friends to get the word out about genetically modified food, especially here on Kauai.
So biotech companies, the major chemical companies of the world, have really made a home here on Kauai. As sugarcane declined, these chemical companies came in and began the genetic engineering of test fields. I think people in the government at that point didn't really understand biotechnology. It's a relatively new science, and they have federally issued permits for biotech crops. And so there's no right to know, there's no disclosure, and there's no state or county permits in order to grow genetically modified crops here on Kauai and throughout our state. So these companies are permitted federally. Kauai has the most permits of anywhere in the world. Most of the testing is done here on Kauai and also on Molokai. Oahu and Maui also have test crops. So here they're able to use some of our prime ag land. It's also an issue with the water. They use a lot of our water resources on the experimental crops. And nothing that they grow here is edible, and it all leaves the island. What is the value of it for Kauai? We are importing the majority of our food, and I think just now it's beginning to become trendy to grow local food. Restaurants are offering local food much more, and I think economically, there's a huge market for locally grown food that could replace these biotech crops. With the money that's being spent on importing food, it would be much better for local farmers to be reaping those sales.
Well, genetically modified foods are required to be labeled on any food that contains them in Europe. So any package that contains GMOs has to contains genetically modified ingredients. And because of that, the Europeans have voiced a strong displeasure in eating GMOs, and most food brands don't contain GMO ingredients. And so there are actually international corporations that produce a non-GMO version for places like Europe and the GMO version for places like America. And you also have GMO-free zones in Asia, in Japan. You have GMO-free zones in Africa. A lot of African nations have said no to GMOs. Haitian farmers burned the GMO seeds that we given them, and because they knew they didn't want to get locked into any multinationals owning life there and things like that. So it is an international issue. We've seen a lot of stuff come up about it. We've seen a recent WikiLeaks cable where the United States was going to retaliate against France and Germany because they wanted to test the GMOs before they allowed them in. And this has worldwide ramifications. It relates to the WTO and open trade, and whether countries are allowed to determine whether this food is safe or not. And we don't think it's safe, and we would like to see it off of Kauai. We don't want to be the test center for this stuff spread out to the rest of the world.
The genetically modified crops that are grown here are in the research stage. It's really kind of a hit and miss. They're infecting plant tissue in the laboratory with foreign genes. What makes biotechnology unique is it's the crossing of unrelated species. So things that would never occur in nature are being forced together in the lab. And nature actually has a lot of barriers in place to prevent these types of crosses from occurring. Here, what goes out into our fields, a lot of times, they don't know if the experiment is right until it comes up and they can test it. So we just really don't know the true nature of these experiments. Earth Justice has won a lawsuit a few years ago to stop the biopharmaceutical crops from being grown here in our state. That was the use of plant crops, food crops, to grow medicine.
We don't really know. There's so many unintended consequences that we really can't begin to list the list. We can start with the pesticides being a serious problem. We also know that the DNA from the GMO plants ends up in the groundwater, ends up in the soil microbes. There's a lot of gene transfer. So they really haven't studied it nearly enough. And I know that the places adjoining the fields that is a very high rate of cancer. There's also an incredibly high rate of asthma. It's very hard to get all the stats on it, but it's way over the top of lots of other places. I really want to celebrate clean food and the choice to have clean food if I want it, because there are no labeling laws in this country. We can't really make those choices unless we are very informed. I don't think that's very American. And, plant diversity is at risk here. We do not need to end up with the lowest common denominator, which would be a GMO plant. The Big Island is already 50% contaminated with GMO papaya, and that's decimated the papaya industry there, really. They're not making nearly as much as they used to. They've lost their organic Japanese market. So it's something to really pay attention to. One of the reasons that we do need to pay attention is with the studies. When you see a rat study done by the Italian government, that within 3 generations we end up with sterility, it begs us to pay attention and really study this without it going into our population, unless you want to get rid of them.
There are a few places in America that are the test center. Puerto Rico is very high in GMO crops. The Hawaiian Islands. I don't think it's any coincidence that island communities are taking the brunt of these GMO crops. I think one, if anything did go really wrong, there's a bit of isolation that, from how much damage could be done. And two, I think the warm island climate, I mean, how many warm climates does America have, tropical climates to grow these test crops? So the fact that they can grow 3 crops a year, kind of grow year-round, is very advantageous to their probably experimental schedule and things like that.
If you eat regular food, you are a guinea pig, not just because we live on this island. Anyone who's eating GMO food is a guinea pig, and so are their children, without them even having to feed those to their children.
I just like to encourage people to think about what they're eating and really eat what is really going to empower themselves, their family, and their community, and the island and the world. Because I think when we eat clean local food, we empower local farmers. And when we eat large biotech multinational corporate food, we're empowering large multinational corporations, which may not be in our best local interest. Where you put your dollars with where you eat is going to affect not only your health, but also it affects the world, in terms of where you spend your money. And I encourage people to spend their money on clean food, and we will change the world if enough of us do that together.